not a beautiful song? Wow. That's Zusha from their new album, Open the Gates. That one is called The Nigun Waltz, and that's partnering with Eitan Katz on that song. A good Vach Shavua Tov. It's great to be with you on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. I'm flying solo tonight. Nina's driving our son to the airport. He's going on a school trip. How's everybody doing? Who is with us on a Saturday night? Lindsay in Cincinnati, Gwen in Kalamazoo, John in Maine, Guy in Ohio, Nancy in North Carolina. Mazel Tov Tar Heels. I'm a Duke dad, so it wasn't so great to come out of Shabbos and hear that news. But okay, well-earned trip to the finals in March Madness for North Carolina and Kansas. Melissa in New York, Bill in mid-Missouri, Louise likes the song, Lucy in Minnesota, PK in Colorado, Salsa in Texas, Paula in the Great Northwest, Paula in Chicago, Anita in Detroit, John, perfect timing, I need this. Jay in California, Mickey in Vineland, cooking breakfast for Sons of Jacob Men's Club in the morning. Lindsay likes the Nigun. John with us from Scotland. Welcome from across the pond. Hope you spell that opening band's name. Zusha. Z-U-S-H-A. Their songs, their albums widely available on, I'm playing it from Apple Music. But, you know, they're great. They've been on our show, actually, Zusha. They played on our back porch a few years ago. I mean, I love Zusha. What can I say? They're awesome. Bella in Florida, Louise in South Jersey, Lynn in North Texas, Seraphim in... No, wait, that... see, I'm on my own. Normally, Nina is sharing the show to a few other groups while I'm getting ready, and tonight I'm doing that. So here we go. Yeah, Aoife in Florida, Gigi in British Columbia. Welcome, everybody. Great to be together. Tonight's page is page 25 here in Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud. We're approaching the end of chapter 2, and there's a bunch of Mishnas piling on. Right now we're discussing Mishnah number 7, and we're kind of in an interesting Mishnaic digression, right? This is all about the laws of Yibum, levirate marriage. When a man dies, married but childless, and he has a brother, the brother either performs Yibum or Chalitza, levirate marriage, or the ceremony that is the alternate mitzvah to marriage with the widow. But the Mishnah started to talk about who triggers this obligation. In other words, if the man has a child, then he is not childless. But so even a mamzer, so if he had a child of an illegitimate union with another Jewish woman, so then he's not considered childless. But if he fathered a child with a Gentile, so then by Jewish law, that's her child, not his child, and so Yibum would still apply. And then, so pertinent to these kinds of laws, the Mishnah is now doing a kind of digression at the Mishnah level away from the laws of Yibum, but sort of defining when is marriage valid. So if somebody got married to somebody that was illegal for them to be married to under Jewish law, right? So an illegitimate union, for example, a priest cannot marry a divorced woman. Well, what if he did marry her? Do we make them divorce, right? So these kinds of questions are coming up and are coming up over the course of a few Mishnahs. And so we don't seem to be talking about Yibum and Chalitza, but we are talking about the laws of marriage and sort of what is a proper marriage, when is a marriage so illegitimate that sometimes they violated a prohibition by getting married, but if they did get married, we don't make them get a divorce. Like in this case where a man was betrothed to one of two sisters, then they were apart for a long time, and when they came back together, they weren't sure who got betrothed to who, or the man died before he actually married the woman, but that betrothal is an important bond. He has a brother or he has two brothers, now they step in. They're not sure who this man was betrothed to before he died. If the two brothers marry the two sisters, they shouldn't have done that. But if they did, we don't make them divorce. In some cases, we do make them divorce. So these are the kinds of laws we're discussing now. Yesterday, we learned that one who was suspected of relations with a married woman, right? So a Jewish man who had an affair or is suspected of having an affair with a Jewish woman who is married to someone else, he may not marry her even after she divorces her husband. And then even if they marry without permission, they must divorce. And Rav said this is only in a case where there were witnesses to her infidelity. It's not that she's a suspected adulteress, it's that she's a proven adulteress. Somebody witnessed the adultery, two witnesses that testified in court about it. And so there, in that situation, her husband divorced her because of the adultery, and then the man who committed the adultery with her is not permitted to marry her. And what we see here is the sages did not live in a live and let live world, sort of according to modern mores and customs. There was the understanding that, the Jewish nation is a nation of priests, right? In other words, a holy nation. And we were told in the Torah that if we conducted ourselves as a holy nation, we would be permitted to dwell in the Holy Land. But if we strayed from that covenant, the land would eject us. And ultimately, that is what happened, right? So we have obligations according to the Torah that don't adhere to other peoples, right? There's the 7 Noahide commandments that are on all human beings. And then there's the other 606 commandments that are for the Jewish people. And it just creates tremendous, obligations and challenges in living a Torah life, and it is not easy. And Jews didn't sign on a dotted line, "I agree to be a Jew." Jews by choice do that. Converts choose to be Jews, but Jews who are born Jewish didn't choose. Nevertheless, we're obligated. And so, you might say, well, what do I care if those people over there, one cheated on her husband and this guy, didn't care that he was helping her commit adultery and now they want to get married. But allowing that to happen, at least for Torah Jews, sort of brings down the level of the whole people. And so this was a ruling that we had. These are courts addressing these kinds of issues 2,000 years ago. But that law is, still on the books, as it were. The law, if one was suspected of committing adultery with a married woman, and due to this, her husband divorced her, and she married someone else and was later divorced from him, it is nevertheless prohibited for her to marry the suspected adulterer. However, if she transgressed and married him, he need not divorce her. Now that contradicts Rava's ruling, but Rava is saying not the suspected adulteress, but the proven adulteress. Okay, so we pick this up at the bottom of 24b tonight. And if you wish, say a different explanation for what Rav was saying. These baraisas that require the wife and the suspected adulterer to divorce, even without witnesses to the adultery, are taught in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, meaning Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. As it is taught in a baraisa, with regard to a case where a husband saw a peddler, right, a door-to-door salesman, leaving the house, and when he entered, he found his wife retying her smock, right, like she's half-dressed right after the door-to-door salesman left the house. So Rebbe said, since this is a distasteful matter, because it looks as though she committed adultery with the peddler, she must be divorced from her husband. Alternatively, if the husband entered after the peddler had left, and he found saliva above the netting of the bed, implying that someone had lain on the bed and spit upward, although no actual act was witnessed, Rebbe said, since this is a distasteful matter, she must be divorced. Now that brings us to 25a. Now note that this is Rebbe's opinion. He's basically saying where there's not just smoke, but a stench of smoke, Okay, we didn't see the fire, but it looks so bad that this couple, she clearly must have cheated, and the couple should divorce because adultery will not be tolerated. Now that is Rebbe's opinion. Perhaps the majority of the rabbis don't agree with him. We're not there yet. Now I'll just read the law on this question, a distasteful matter, right? Which is davar mechoyar. Right, so a davar mechoyar. What is considered a distasteful matter? It is a case where, for example, one entered the house of a married woman after some other man had left and found her standing next to the bed in her undergarments, or one saw the couple exiting from a secluded place, or one saw them lock themselves in a room, or any other similar circumstance. Each case is judged at the judge's discretion. Right, so we see that you're not going to set up a set of circumstances and enshrine it in law, because it's always possible that it looks really bad, but there was a valid explanation. So you're not going to take a set of circumstances and base a law on that. However, if it looks really bad, you might take that matter to court and then have a judge examine witnesses, etc. And then the judge would decide, does this couple have to divorce because there clearly was adultery or not? Okay, now we're on 25a. The same applies if the husband found the shoes reversed under the bed, so that the toe of the shoe faced the bed. This is a sign that a stranger came in and placed them like that. Rebbe said, since this is a distasteful matter, she must be divorced. And the Gemara questions this. Shoes turned around? Let him see whose they are and clarify who the stranger was, and then find out what he was doing there. Don't jump to conclusions. Rather, the case was that he found the place of the shoes, i.e. shoe prints, reversed under the bed, and he cannot recognize whose shoe prints they are. So Rebbe said, since this is a distasteful matter, she must be divorced. Now, this isn't a much more, how should we put it, prudish society, right, than modern times. But nevertheless, what they're saying is, a proper marriage is one in which, neither spouse is going to have some stranger in the bedroom with them, alone and secluded. Like, maybe there's some kind of, innocent explanation for that, but you better be prepared to explain it carefully because it looks really bad, and you shouldn't have created such a strong appearance of impropriety without some kind of crazy extenuating circumstance to justify it. Now the Gemara concludes, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rav, that they must divorce only if there were witnesses. And the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, that they must divorce if it is a distasteful matter. And the Gemara challenges this. Well, one law is difficult as it contradicts the other. Do you make them divorce only when there's witnesses to the adultery, or do you make them divorce if even there's a distasteful, smell of impropriety about it? So the Gemara answers, this contradiction is not difficult. La kasha. This one relates to a case where the rumor ceases and the woman is sent away only if there are witnesses. But that law relates to a case where the rumor does not cease, in which case he divorces her even if there are no witnesses. And now the Gemara elucidates the cases. In cases of a rumor that does not cease, even if there are no witnesses, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, and he divorces her. If the rumor ceases and there are witnesses, then the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rav, and he divorces her simply because there are witnesses, but otherwise he would not. So here we're learning this idea of a persistent rumor. And it's interesting that we're learning that today, because the discussion this past week on the Torah portion that we read this morning, Tazria, which was the laws of Tzura'as, right, which we've studied a bunch of times and will keep coming up. But who is the Mitzora? Right, that's kind of a miraculous skin disease that no longer exists. Miraculous in the sense it's a bummer to get it, but it was a physical manifestation of a spiritual malady that was a punishment at the times when we were at a much higher level of holiness and living in the Holy Land as a holy nation. And if people spoke Lashon Hara, or lashon hara, right, which is we translate as a gossip, but gossip has a slightly negative connotation. Lashon hara, evil tongue, in Hebrew, much stronger. Right, so to speak rumors about people, to be a talebearer, a gossip monger, that's considered really evil. And now we see a little bit in today's daf about the consequences of spreading rumors, right? Because if it's a persistent rumor that this woman is an adulteress, maybe she's innocent. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for what happened. And that's why it's so important for people to shut their mouths and let the couple work it out on their own and not be a talebearer about them. You know, lately there was that incident at the Oscars, which has led to a lot of gossip mongering in our culture. Now you might say, well, the people involved are celebrities, public figures. They put their personal lives into the public space. And that's why we're talking about it. But actually, it's still lashon hara, and it's really a waste of our time and our, thinking and speaking abilities. And we should focus on loftier matters to do our speculating upon. So let's continue. Now, the Gemara clarifies this. At what point is a rumor considered to be a persistent rumor that's really going to besmirch someone's reputation so badly that we might step in and say this couple should be divorced? Now, Abaye said, my mother told me, this is interesting because Abaye was an orphan. His mother died when he was very young. He was raised by another woman whom he called mother, and he often cites her in terms of, halachic rulings and Torah teachings that he's giving over to the other sages. So says Abaye, my mother told me, a rumor in the city lasts a day and a half. Clearly pre-internet times. The Gemara comments, we said that this is the length of time only if the rumor did not cease in the meantime. But if the rumor did cease in the meantime, even if it was later renewed, this is considered a rumor that had ceased and we disregard it. And we said that a rumor that ceased is not considered persistent only if the reason that it ceased was not due to fear of the individual about whom it is said. But if people stopped spreading the rumor because they were afraid of the power of the individual who was the subject of the rumor, then we believe the rumor is what they're saying. And we said that a persistent rumor has validity only if the subject of the rumor does not have any known enemies. But if he has enemies, it may be assumed that it is the enemies who put the rumor out about him. Now that is a nice out, right? For saying, because who doesn't have enemies in this world? And so, if people, you might even say that if people are gossiping about you, they just become your enemies. They've acted like your enemies. And that would be a reason not to give credence to any rumors that you hear about people. We learned in a Mishna there, Gittin 45b, a man who divorces his wife due to her bad reputation may not take her back again, even if it turns out that the rumor was untrue. Likewise, if he divorced his wife due to a vow of hers that is unbearable to him, he may not take her back, even if she is released from that vow. Rabba bar Rav Huna sent a question to Rabba bar Rav Nachman. Our teacher instruct us, if one of those men listed in that Mishnah divorced his wife due to her bad reputation or vow, and it was therefore prohibited for him to take her back, and yet he nevertheless married her, what is the law? Must he divorce her? So similar to the question we've been asking in these cases where they're not supposed to marry, but they do it anyway, do we make them divorce? So here was a man whose wife put herself in a position where she was, rumors were flying around about her committing adultery. He divorced her because of it. Later, maybe the rumors were proven to be untrue, so he remarried her. Now, do we say that because he married her on account of those persistent rumors, that they should remain divorced, or now that he's married her, he wasn't supposed to, but he did it, do we break them up? Rabba bar Rav Nachman said to him, we already learned in the Mishnah on page 24b, the Mishnah we just had, with regard to one who was suspected of committing adultery with a married woman, and he, her husband, divorced her, even if he subsequently remarried her, he must divorce her. And Rabba bar Rav Huna said to him, is this comparable to the case I asked about? There in the Mishnah, it says, the court removed her from him. Whereas here on Gittin 45b, the Mishnah states, He divorced her of his own accord. Perhaps if the court requires them to divorce, the law is different. And the Gemara explains, and Rabba bar Rav Nachman, who held that the two Mishnayos were comparable, had a text of the Mishnah that also read, he divorced her instead of they remove her. So Rabba bar Rav Huna asks, still, is this comparable? Here, the question was raised in a case where the first husband remarried her, which will not strengthen the rumors of her bad reputation. On the contrary, there were rumors about her, he divorced her, then he remarries her. It must be that the rumors were false, and that would kind of reinstate her good name in the community. But there, the Mishnah refers to the man with whom she committed adultery, remarrying her, which strengthens those rumors. If she right? So she had an affair with some other guy, her husband divorced her, then she married the man with whom she was having the affair. The court steps in and says, no, you two cannot be married. We're not going to reward that adulterous behavior. We make you divorce. If he then remarries her anyway, we're going to break them up because, again, that brings down, the level of the community. It strengthens the rumors against her. Perhaps if the court requires them to divorce, the law is different. He did marry, he must divorce her. So too the sages said, in the case of one who divorced his wife due to her reputation or vow, he may not take her back, and if he does remarry her, he must divorce her. But the Gemara rejects this. That is not so. As there, when the man suspected of committing adultery marries the woman, he thereby strengthens the rumor of her adultery. She's marrying the guy with whom she was accused of committing adultery. For this reason, he must divorce her. But here, we say that he, the husband, established the facts of the rumor, found that it was not so, and the rumor was baseless. Therefore, there is no need for him to divorce her if he remarries her. And Rabba bar Rav Huna's question remains unresolved. And that concludes the Gemara discussion of Mishnah number 7. Now we go to Mishnah number 8. An agent who brought a bill of divorce from a country overseas and said, it was written in my presence and it was signed in my presence as required in order to establish the bill of divorce as valid, may not marry the wife, meaning the divorcee. Right? So again, we're talking about general laws of marriage, and we're still on that digression away from the laws of Yibum and Chalitza. So here we have a case where the husband was in some other country, and he sent a bill of divorce via an agent, and the agent testifies that the bill of divorce is authentic. He, the agent who brought the bill of divorce, is not going to be permitted to marry the woman who is divorced with that bill of divorce because he has a conflict of interest if he's interested in that woman. Even if it developed later, it's going to look bad, right? He didn't even know her, but if they now develop a relationship, they can't get married because it's going to look bad that he was the one who brought the bill of divorce. Since the validity of the bill of divorce is based upon this man's testimony, marrying the divorcee creates the impression that he had an ulterior motive for testifying. Similarly, a witness who testified that a certain man died, or testified, I killed him, or we killed him, may not marry that man's wife. And Rabbi Yehuda says, if he testified, I killed him, his wife may not be married at all based on that evidence, as his testimony is unreliable. But if he said we killed him, his wife may be married to anyone other than those witnesses. This is very, very interesting. So what we're dealing with here is the aguna issue, right? So this is a woman whose husband went off to war, for example, and then went missing. And he's missing for years. So this woman can't get on with her life. He's not. There's no testimony that he's dead, so that she's a widow and can go marry someone else. She's married to a man who's simply missing. So if someone comes and testifies, no, I saw him, he's dead. Okay, now she's free, and as we've seen earlier, that this is one of those cases where they will accept the testimony of even a single witness, so that she won't be trapped in this, suspended state where she can't go marry someone else because that man might still be alive. If someone testifies, yeah, he's dead, that testimony is accepted, and then she is free. Now, where it gets interesting is if the one who comes and says that your husband died also says, I killed him, right? Now, first of all, I killed him is not the same as I murdered him. So I killed him might be that he's a soldier who was fighting on the other side, the opposing army, and he didn't break a law by killing her husband. But he can say, I killed him. And then if it's not murder, then maybe that testimony would be accepted. But here they're talking about I killed him like I murdered him. That's problematic because at the same time that he's saying that man is dead, he's also saying, and I'm a murderer. Right? And so the murderer, is he going to be believed? One problem is that he's a criminal, and do we accept the testimony of a criminal? The other problem is that that very testimony incriminates him, and we actually don't allow people to testify against themselves. Very interesting. It's not the same as a confession. Right? It's not the same as a confession. Even the case of, we'll get to these in the laws of Sanhedrin. Right now, we're just touching very lightly on this law. But this idea that we don't allow a person to incriminate themselves arises from the idea that we don't allow a relative to testify in court against a relative. Right? So since you don't allow a family member to testify against you about a crime that you committed, you're your own closest relative, and you're not allowed to testify against yourself. They're going to be seeking other witnesses to establish the guilt. So, since he can't testify against himself that he's a murderer, that testimony is going to be rendered invalid to free her from, the fact that the victim of that murder was her husband, who's been missing all these years. But if he says we killed him, then it might be that he's not the murderer. He was just present when a murder took place and there were other murderers, or he was even one of the gang, but he didn't, plunge the knife into the victim. And then the testimony is going to have more weight. That is, and that is Mishnah number 8. Let's go on with the Gemara. The Gemara clarifies the reason that the agent may not marry the divorcee applies specifically in a case where he brings the bill of divorce from a country overseas. As in this case, we, the court, rely upon his testimony to validate the bill of divorce. But an agent who brings a bill of divorce from the land of Israel need not make any verbal declaration, and since we, the court, do not rely upon his testimony but upon the written bill of divorce alone, he may marry his wife, i.e. the divorcee, since it does not arouse suspicion. What it seems to be implied there is that the written bill of divorce could be authenticated even without the witness testifying that it is real, right? Because it's coming from a Beis Din, a rabbinic court in Israel, whose markings are known to the rabbinic court, probably in Babylonia, who's receiving that bill of divorce. Now, the Gemara challenges this, but also in the case of a witness who said that the husband died, we, the court, do not rely solely upon his testimony. As the master said, a woman is exacting in her investigation of the truth of the testimony that her husband died before she marries again. And it is primarily on that basis that she is permitted to remarry. And yet it is taught that she still may not marry, that he, the agent who brought the bill of divorce, may not marry this divorcee, this woman. And the Gemara answers the two cases are not comparable. As there, in the case when a witness testifies that the husband has died, there is not anything written as proof. It's not the bill of divorce case. It's just he saw the man dead. And therefore, he, the witness, may not marry the woman. She is now free to marry. She just can't marry the guy who says he witnessed the death of her husband. However, here in a case where an agent brings a bill of divorce from the land of Israel, there is a written document that is valid without any testimony. And as we learned in a Mishnah that we'll encounter in this volume on page 117, what is the difference between a bill of divorce and death? A witness who brings a bill of divorce versus a witness who says, I saw your husband dead. Why does the court rely upon those men who are not trusted as witnesses to the death of a husband if they act as agents to bring a bill of divorce, even from overseas, such that they must give testimony that it was written and signed in their presence? And the difference is that with regard to a bill of divorce, the writing proves their testimony. Now, the Mishnah stated that if the witness said with regard to the husband that he died, or I killed him, or we killed him, then he may not marry the wife of the deceased, right? If he brings the bill of divorce, that's what they're saying, that she can marry that man, right? Because unless he's needed to testify as to the authenticity of the bill of divorce, if the bill of divorce is valid on its face, then, if she somehow formed a relationship to the man who brought the bill of divorce, it would be permitted to marry him. But if his testimony was needed to establish the validity of the bill of divorce, then she would not be permitted to marry him. Now, the Mishna stated that if a witness said with regard to the husband that he died, or I killed him, or we killed him, that he may not marry the wife of the deceased. The Gemara infers that he, the witness himself, may not marry the wife. This implies that to another she may be married on the basis of his testimony, right? So if a guy says, I killed your husband, she can't marry him. Why would she want to? But she could marry someone else. She is considered free based on this testimony. The Gemara challenges this. Didn't Rav Yosef say, with regard to one who testified that so-and-so sodomized me against my will, and then he who testified to being the victim of the sexual assault and another bystander witness can combine as a pair of witnesses in order to put the assailant to death for homosexual intercourse. But if he testified, I was willingly sodomized by so-and-so, then he is wicked by his own admission since he willingly transgressed. And the Torah said, put not your hand with the wicked to be a corrupt witness. Exodus 23:1. If one renders himself unfit as a witness by admitting to murder, how can his testimony be accepted to permit the wife to remarry? And if you would say that testimony that a woman's husband died is different, as the sages ruled leniently in such matters, and perhaps accepted testimony of a wicked witness in such cases to free her so that she would not be stuck perpetually married to a missing man, they were more lenient in these cases. But didn't Rav Menashe say, and now we're on 25b, although one who is considered a robber, according to the words of the sages, is unfit for other forms of testimony, right? If you're a known thief, your testimony as a witness will not be accepted. Nevertheless, he is fit as a witness for testimony that a woman's husband died. You see the leniency in these cases. A robber, according to Torah law, is unfit as a witness, even for testimony that a woman's husband has died, according to another view. So should we say that Rav Menashe says in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah that one who is considered absolutely wicked because he admitted that he is a murderer is unfit for testifying to the death of a husband. But one who was merely present among a gang of murderers is not inherently unfit. Now the Gemara rejects this. Rav Menashe could have said to you, I am speaking even according to the opinion of the rabbis. Although the rabbis did not allow one who was wicked by Torah law to testify for a woman, a witness who admitted, I killed him, is nevertheless believed. And the rationale of the rabbis here is in accordance with the opinion of Rava. As Rava disputed Rav Yosef's opinion and said, even if one said that he was willingly sodomized by this man, he is not believed concerning his own actions because a person is his own relative. Consequently, he may not testify about himself, just as the testimony of any relative is disqualified. And furthermore, a person does not make himself wicked. His testimony with regard to his own actions is inadmissible because he is his own relative. But his testimony is accepted both to put a sodomizer, somebody who raped him, to death, or to render it permitted for a woman to remarry by saying that he killed her husband. We don't accept his testimony to declare him wicked, but we accept his testimony to free her so that, that we've now heard her husband actually died, and this is the only witness available to testify to that. The Gemara asks, shall we say according to this explanation, the opinion that Rav Yosef spoke in his accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? And the Gemara rejects this. Rav Yosef could have said to you, I am speaking even according to the opinion of the rabbis, as in my opinion, testimony enabling a woman to remarry is different in that the rabbis ruled more leniently, and they even accept testimony from a completely wicked individual. However, Rav Menashe, who renders unfit one who is wicked by Torah law from testimony enabling a woman to remarry, Rav Menashe spoke in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who differentiates even in such testimony between one who is considered wicked according to Torah law and one who is considered wicked by rabbinic law. In the Mishnah, it is taught that the court accepts testimony from one who said, I killed him or we killed him. While Rabbi Yehuda differentiates between one who said, I killed him, whose testimony is not accepted, and one who said, we killed him, whose testimony is accepted, and the woman may be married to others. And the Gemara asks, what is the difference between I killed him and we killed him? Isn't he a murderer by his own admission? As well, when he testifies, we killed him. And Rabbi Yehuda said, do not understand that by saying we killed him, he included himself among the murderers. Rather, it is referring to a case where he said, I was with his murderers, but this person was not an active participant to the murder. And it is taught in a baraisa that this is the basis for Rabbi Yehuda's distinction. They told Rabbi Yehuda, there was an incident involving an armed bandit, listim, who was taken out to be executed in the passage, Megizat, of Cappadocia. And he said to those present, go and tell the wife of Shimon the priest that I killed her husband as I entered Lod. And some say he said, as he entered Lod. And they married off his wife on the basis of this testimony, right? So here you have somebody who's clearly a wicked person. He was an armed bandit, right? So this is a highwayman who, holds up people on the road, and if they don't give him their money, he kills them and then takes their money. And he did this to a fellow named Shimon the priest. Later they caught him. He was taken out to be executed, and he wants to do one decent thing before he leaves this world. And he says, tell the wife of Shimon the priest, who's been missing all this time because I hid the body after I killed him. It was never found, that I killed Shimon the priest. So this is somebody who's absolutely wicked. According to Torah law, we should not believe his testimony. But in this case, perhaps we're going to be lenient because this will free the wife of Shimon the priest to finally have resolution in her life and to know what happened to her poor husband, and that she can, get on with it and marry another person. So go and tell the wife of Shimon the priest that I killed her husband as I entered Lod. And some say that the bandit said as he entered Lod. And they married off his wife on the basis of this testimony. And this implies that the court accepts testimony from the murderer himself. Now, Rabbi Yehuda said to them, you derive a proof from there? The case was that he said, I was with his murderers, not that he himself murdered the woman's husband. The Gemara challenges, how could Rabbi Yehuda understand the incident in such a way? But it is taught in the baraisa that the witness himself was an armed bandit. And the Gemara answers, he was captured for a charge of armed banditry. The Gemara asks, but it is taught that he was taken out to be executed, implying that he was found guilty of murder. And the Gemara answers, that was a Gentile court, and they execute without being precise. One who is among a gang of bandits is executed by a Gentile court, regardless of whether or not he himself was a murderer. And this baraisa therefore provides evidence that Rabbi Yehuda admits the testimony of such a witness only if he says, I was with his murderers. Now, it's interesting that you might say, the rabbis are being very critical of non-rabbinic, non-Jewish courts, and that they play fast and loose with the law and are much more willing to, execute a defendant than a rabbinic court would be. It's actually true, and it remains true. What I'm getting here is I don't think they had in rabbinic law, right, in Torah law, as expressed in, and we'll get to this in Tractate Sanhedrin, a felony murder rule, right? So the felony murder rule exists here in the United States, and it's that if, two people are committing armed robbery and one of them kills the victim, right? They go in and they stick up a 7-Eleven, and one of them kills the poor attendant at the cash register, and then they get away, and later they're caught. So the one who didn't kill the attendant says, I, participated in a plot to rob 7-Eleven, not to commit murder. I never would have joined the plot if I knew that my partner was a, murderous, psychopath who was going to kill the guy behind the register. And I never intended to commit murder. So I should go to jail for armed robbery, but not for murder. And the court and the prosecutor will say to him, it was foreseeable that when you entered 7-Eleven with a partner with guns to rob the store, that your partner might kill someone in the course of that robbery, and therefore you are guilty of what's called felony murder, meaning you're guilty of murder, period. That is American law. But apparently, a rabbinic court would not execute somebody if his partner committed the murder. I'm not sure. Okay, Mishnah number 9 here in chapter 2. And we're going to do, and this is a short Mishnah, a short discussion, and then that will conclude our page for tonight. Mishnah number 9. A sage who refused to release a woman from a vow that rendered the wife forbidden to her husband by that vow, resulting in her being divorced from her husband, may not marry her so as to avoid suspicion that he rendered her forbidden to her husband in order to marry her himself. So if, for example, a woman made a vow, I will not, sleep with my husband. I vow never to sleep with my husband again. So that's going to be a problem in the marriage. Like under Torah law, a husband can annul his wife's vow, but there's a time period when he has to do that. And if he doesn't do it within that time period, then he can't annul it. She has to go to a sage and say to him, I didn't mean it. I took that vow, but if I'd known what the consequences of that vow would be, I never would have made that vow. And then if he's a qualified sage, he can release her from that vow. What we're learning here is if the sage says, well, no, I'm not going to release you from that vow. You meant it when you said it, and I can't find extenuating circumstances, and I don't release you from the vow. So since she's never going to be allowed to sleep with her husband again without violating a vow that would have Torah consequences, her husband might say, well, then I don't want to be married to you. And he divorces her. Now the sage who refused to release her from the vow, she's free to marry anyone in the world or any Jewish man in the world, but not that sage, because again, the appearance of impropriety. People will say that the reason he didn't release her from the vow was so that he himself could marry her. That's what the Mishnah is telling us. However, a judge before whom a woman performed refusal when she was a minor, as we've seen, if a father betrothed his daughter when she was a minor to some man, then she can refuse that betrothal and walk away, and she's not divorced. It's as if she was never betrothed at all. But she does that before a judge in a rabbinic court. So a judge before whom a woman performed refusal when she was a minor, declaring that she did not desire the husband chosen for her by her family, or before whom she performed chalitza, may marry her because he was only one member of the court, thereby alleviating suspicion that in some way he served on this court and accepted her testimony that she refuses this man to whom she was betrothed, and that he, served on that court for his own ulterior motive to actually marry her himself. He's not suspected of that because he's part of a court of at least 3. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Gemara. The Mishnah taught that a sage who rendered a woman forbidden to her husband may not then marry her. And the Gemara deduces from here, this implies that if he rendered her permitted to her husband and she was later widowed or divorced, then he may marry her. And the Gemara clarifies this. With what are we dealing? If we say that he was a single judge and not part of a court, can a single judge dissolve vows? But didn't Rav say that Rabbi Chia bar Avin said that Rav Amram said it is taught in a Baraisa? Dissolution of vows requires a court of 3 judges. There's no single sage that can dissolve a vow. Rather, could it be a case of 3 judges rather than 1? In such a case, would they be suspect of distorting judgment? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah, if she performed refusal or performed chalitza before him, he may marry her because he functioned as a member of a court rather than the sole judge. And this teaches that there is no suspicion of a judge if he is one of a panel of 3. And the Gemara answers, actually, you should explain that this case is that he was a single judge who refused to dissolve her vow. And it is as Rav Chisda said that Rabbi Yochanan said, vows may be dissolved even by a single judge if he is an expert in the law of vows. And a 3-member court is not always necessary. Here too, it is referring to a single expert who is refusing to nullify her vow. It is taught in the Mishnah that if a woman perform refusal or perform chalitza before a judge, he may still marry her as he was part of a court. And the Gemara deduces from here the reason is specifically that he functioned on a court as one of 3 judges. And the Gemara deduces, well then, if there were only 2 judges, he would not be permitted to marry her. If so, in what way is this case different from that which we learned in a Baraisa? If witnesses sign on the document of sale, of a field, or on a woman's bill of divorce, the sages were not concerned about this matter if one of the witnesses subsequently purchased the field or married the divorcee. Since there are 2 witnesses, there is no suspicion that they collaborated for the benefit of one of them. And the Gemara answers, if there were 2 judges, there would also be no concern. However, this Mishnah itself comes to teach us that a refusal must be performed before a full court to exclude the opinion of the one who said that refusal may be performed before 2. This teaches us that refusal of a minor, of the man to whom her family betrothed her, must happen before a court of 3 judges to avoid all later problems. A dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to one who was prohibited from marrying a certain woman. If he nevertheless married her, despite the prohibition, what is the law with regard to whether he must divorce her? It seems like we just had that question several times. Rav Kahana said, if he married her, he must divorce her. Rav Ashi said, if he married her, he need not divorce her. Rav Zudi from the school of Rav Papi taught the sages of Baraisa in accordance with the statement of the one who said that if he married her, he need not divorce her. It seems like it's too general of a statement. It depends on what prohibition was violated that led to him needing to be divorced from her, and he married her anyway. It seems like, right, if he was the suspected adulterer and he married her against this prohibition, then they make him divorce. But if he was the husband who divorced her because of suspicions and then he remarried her, he wasn't supposed to remarry her, but if he did, we don't make him divorce, right? So it seems like the nature of the prohibition involved matters. The rabbi said to Rav Ashi, with regard to the law that you said, that if he married her, he need not divorce her, was it based upon tradition or is it your own conclusion? He said to them, it is the Mishnah. I reached this conclusion from the wording of the Mishnah, which taught that one suspected by others of engaging in sexual relations with a Canaanite maidservant, and she was subsequently set free, or with a Gentile woman, and she subsequently converted, may not marry that woman. But if he did marry her, the judges of the court do not remove her from him. So in those cases, right, that the prohibition that was violated there is not one that's sufficiently strong that if he, violated the prohibition and married her anyway, that we would then step in and make them divorced. It's not that big a prohibition as to trigger that. Apparently, we do not remove her from her husband owing to suspicion due to rumor alone, and here too, we do not remove her from her husband due to a rumor. Right? That's what Rava had said before. We would remove her if there were witnesses to the adultery. That would be a different case. But rumor alone, he shouldn't have married her because of the rumors. But if he did marry her, we don't step in and make them divorce. That concludes the Gemara on Mishnah number 9. And that's what we've got tonight. Let me see if I can scan for some questions. Hold on. Here on Yevamos, page 25. Okay, hold on a second. Yeah, Nina's not back, so she's not passing me questions, so I have to scan myself. Always hard to do, to read comments as they come in. Hold on. I'll just take a few questions. No, that's not a question. That's a greeting. That's not a question. Dale Hudson. I don't think that's a question. Okay, hold on. So Salsa Canedo says, as a single woman living by myself, I'm uncomfortable in situations when male technicians go to my house for repairs. Being alone with a stranger is creepy and unsafe all around. Right? That sort of supports this idea. Don't put yourself in that situation unless there's some, pressing reason for it. And then if it must happen, see if you can have another person around so there's not even going to be some kind of appearance of impropriety. Bill, is there a statute of limitations for the agent who bore the bill of divorce, I wonder? Say, for instance, that the divorced woman married another man and was widowed. Could the agent then marry her? Suppose he was the one who married and then became a widower. Very interesting, right? Very interesting. Is that some kind of absolute prohibition that the one whose testimony was required to free her from the husband who died overseas, and so therefore he's not permitted to marry her now that she's free, or if he brought a bill of divorce that required authentication according to his testimony, so he's not allowed to marry the divorcee. But then let's say a bunch of time passes and she marries someone else and then divorces that one. Can she go back and marry the guy who was initially prohibited to her? I don't know the answer, but it's a really good question. You would think that at that point, that appearance of impropriety no longer, pertains to that situation. Would they just be free to marry, or would they need to go check with a competent halakhic authority, ask their local Orthodox rabbi, are we free to marry now? And then if the question ever came up, hey, wasn't he the one who brought the bill of divorce? How could you marry him? They could always explain, no, well, she was married in the meantime to someone else. I'm her third husband. And we got a heter. We got a permission to do this, from a gadol, right? From some great rabbi who is a halakhic authority. Bill, granting we'll no doubt discuss this more when we get to Sanhedrin, but supposing the murderer has had an attack of conscience and desires to perform teshuvah and knows that the only way he can even begin to make right what he has done is to confess and accept the punishment that is coming to him, what then does the penitent murderer do? I admit what I'm picturing here is some sort of ancient Jewish version of the Father Brown mysteries, which I'm half tempted to pitch to the BBC for their next period piece. I was thinking along similar lines, Bill, as I was reading this, right? If he really is, why is he confessing, right? Is it being, coerced out of him? Or did he come forward, because he's near the end of his life, he's sick, he just wants to admit what he did? And if there's no other way to corroborate the testimony, there's no other evidence except this man's words, maybe it's not going to be accepted for certain areas of law, but will be accepted for others. As we're seeing, the sages are going to be lenient for releasing a woman from this case of the missing husband, where they would be stringent for other types of law. It could be property law could be involved here, that this guy says, well, I murdered that guy, that's why he's been missing. And the case is not to let his wife, his widow, now get remarried, but rather that, a field will pass to his impoverished son. Not quite as much is at stake as the woman who is chained to the missing husband. Is that testimony going to be accepted under those circumstances? I'm certainly not expert enough to answer the question, but these are the kinds of questions that will come up in that discussion. Really very interesting. Yosef, what is the status of women's testimony? Is it valid in the time of the rabbis, right? So that was definitely a problem, which we've seen before. Very much a patriarchal society, very uncomfortable for the modern ear, that the testimony of a woman did not count in the same way as the testimony of a man, right? A woman was kind of like a minor. You weren't going to accept that testimony. They were looking for two Jewish men to be the witnesses. However, in this area, the law to release a woman in the case of the missing husband, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that they would accept a woman's testimony, right? They would accept a single witness, and that single witness could even be a woman, even though for other kinds of matters, a woman's testimony was not. So that shows you the extent of the leniency in that ancient system. I think that's it. Okay, so that's what I've got this evening. Oh, just one more question. Very interesting comment from Charles over on the YouTube side. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says that if the shoes are misplaced, the husband must divorce his wife. But wouldn't the law of the sota kick in, and wouldn't she be subject to drink the bitter waters? Yes and no. This would be further evidence to make her suspected adulteress when the temple was standing, and the ordeal of drinking the bitter waters in the temple was a possibility, right? This was not a possibility after the temple was destroyed. But even when that ritual under Torah law was possible, it wasn't triggered just because he found the shoe prints. There would have to be several conditions. First of all, that she was secluded with a man once, and the husband said to her, that looks suspicious, don't do that again. And then she did it again, and there were witnesses that she was secluded. Only then she would become the sota. So this, the footprints thing wouldn't be enough to trigger that ordeal, as I understand it. Okay, that's what I've got for us this evening. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, the regular time, for our Sunday class. Have a terrific night, and Yasher Koach. May we all be strengthened to continue to start our week, even on a late Saturday night, with some beautiful